January 14, 1945. High over frozen enemy territory, a 22-year-old American pilot is on his very first combat mission. Through a sudden break in the clouds, Second Lieutenant Robert W. Foy sees an impossible sight, a massive German airfield, packed wingtip to wingtip with over 100 enemy fighters. Doctrine for a rookie was simple: observe, report, and survive. Foy ignored it. He pushed the stick forward, and his P-51 Mustang began a solitary dive toward the heart of the Luftwaffe. One pilot against an entire hornet's nest. What could he possibly hope to achieve? The story that emerged from that day became a legend. In a single blistering pass, it was claimed Second Lieutenant Foy destroyed or damaged 14 enemy aircraft, an almost unbelievable number. This is a forensic investigation into that claim. By analyzing his declassified combat report and gun camera film, we will uncover what really happened. How do we separate the chaotic reality of combat from the powerful myth it created? By January of 1945, the air war over Europe was no longer a contest of equals. It was a brutal battle of attrition. The American 8th Air Force, with its long-range P-51 escorts from elite units like the 357th Fighter Group, was now striking targets deep inside the German heartland, pushing the limits of both men and machines. For the Luftwaffe, it was a crisis of survival. Crippled by a severe lack of fuel and a catastrophic loss of veteran pilots, it was a shadow of its former self. High-altitude dogfights against the superior P-51 Mustang were now suicidal. A new, desperate strategy had taken hold. Hoard the remaining fighters, keep them hidden and concentrated on the ground, conserving every last drop of fuel and every pilot for one massive, decisive blow, what some German commanders hoped would be a great blow to the American bomber streams. This strategy turned every German airfield into a powder keg, packed with aircraft and ripe for attack. But for an American pilot, the sky itself was a minefield. Hundreds of miles from home, over a frozen landscape, a simple navigational error, a sputtering engine, or a single tactical mistake didn't just lose you the fight, it meant you simply didn't come back. And on the morning of January 14th, a single command decision would light the fuse, throwing all established plans out the window and sending pilots directly toward that powder keg. The mission began as routine, a high-altitude escort for B-17 bombers. But as the massive formation approached the German border, the continent vanished beneath a solid, impenetrable blanket of clouds. The primary target was completely obscured. Over the radio, the inevitable call came to abort. The bombers were turning for home. For the fighter pilots of the 357th, this usually meant one thing: mission over. But then, a different voice cut through the static. The group commander. The order was not to return to base. It was a complete release. Fighters are free to engage targets of opportunity. In an instant, the rules were gone. The structured, defensive escort was now an aggressive, freelance hunt, a license to push deeper into enemy airspace, alone. And with this new, dangerous freedom, Lieutenant Foy's flight leader made his choice. He banked his 4 Mustangs east, toward Czechoslovakia. For more than an hour, the 4 Mustangs of Yellow Flight flew east, a lonely patrol over a desolate white landscape. Leading them was Captain Charles Dregna, a veteran ace. On his wing, on his first ever combat mission, was Second Lieutenant Robert Foy. The droning of their Merlin engines was a constant, hypnotic hum, a stark contrast to the tension in the cockpit. Every pilot was acutely aware of their position, hundreds of miles from base, deep over enemy-held Czechoslovakia, with the fuel gauge a constant, nagging reminder of the long journey home. They were hunters, but they were also vulnerable, scanning the brief, tantalizing gaps in the clouds for any sign of a target. Suddenly, Dregna's voice crackled over the radio. He'd spotted it, a massive, perfectly clear hole in the undercast, miles wide, and directly below them lay a sight that made every pilot's heart jump. Prague-Kbely airfield. It wasn't just an airfield, it was a jackpot. Dozens upon dozens of Luftwaffe fighters, Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, were parked in neat, geometric rows. Some were being refueled from tanker trucks, their wings glistening with frost and spilled fuel. It was a fighter pilot's dream, a target of almost unimaginable value, laid bare and completely unaware. For the German ground crews at Kbely, the foul weather had been a blessing. It grounded the ever-present threat of American heavy bombers. A lazy, false sense of security had settled over the field. So when the high-pitched scream of 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines at full power tore through the damp, cold air, it was a sound from a nightmare. The surprise was absolute. The wail of an air raid siren began to climb, but it was already too late. Men scattered, diving for cover. Flak gunners, caught completely off guard, scrambled frantically towards their weapons, struggling to traverse their cannons directions towards a sky that, just seconds before, had been empty. "Yellow leader going down, let's get him." Dragney's order was crisp and clear. He rolled his P-51 Wee Darlin onto its wing and plunged into a near-vertical dive. As his wingman, Foy's job was to follow instantly, his own Mustang matching the maneuver without hesitation. The P-51 was made for this moment. Its revolutionary laminar flow wings sliced through the air with incredible efficiency, allowing the fighter to build up terrifying speed in a dive. The altimeter unwound furiously as Foy's plane screamed towards the ground, pushing past 400 miles per hour. The world became a blur of green and white. Foy pulled back on the stick, leveling out just above the treetops. The G-force pressed him into his seat. Ahead, through his gun sight, was a long, perfect line of parked Bf-109s. His thumb moved to the red button on his control stick. For 7 seconds, an eternity in combat, he held it down. The Mustang bucked and shuddered as all 6 of its 50-caliber machine guns erupted, spewing a torrent of over 600 armor-piercing and incendiary rounds. Tracers streaked across the airfield, stitching a devastating line across the parked German fighters. The pass was over in an instant. Foy was now a fleeting shadow, a ghost screaming across the airfield at ground level. He had converted the immense potential energy of his dive into pure speed, his single greatest defense. He instinctively began jinking, making sharp, unpredictable turns left and right, as the German flak, now fully active, began to fill the air behind him with black puffs of smoke. His heart pounded against his ribs. He focused on one thing only: survival. He hugged the terrain, using his speed to outrun the gunners, and pushed west, climbing slightly to rejoin his flight for the long, perilous flight back to England. Back at his base in Leiston, an adrenaline-fueled Robert Foy recounted the mission to the squadron intelligence officer. He described the high-speed blur of the pass, the long lines of enemy planes, the flashes of impact and fire. Based on what he saw in that fleeting, chaotic moment, he made a staggering claim: 14 enemy aircraft destroyed or damaged. The 8th Air Force, however, had brutally strict rules for confirming victories. A pilot's word, especially in the confusion of a strafing run, was not enough. They needed cold, hard proof. But Foy's P-51 Mustang had been carrying an impartial witness. The truth of January 14th was captured on just a few feet of grainy 16mm film. This is what the impartial eye of Foy's gun camera recorded. The footage is violent and chaotic. For a few frantic seconds, the gun sight sweeps across a line of parked Bf-109s as the Mustang screams over the airfield. We see the bright flashes of 50-caliber rounds striking fuselages and wings, chunks of metal erupting into the air. Then, the first licks of smoke and flame from 1, then 2, then 3 aircraft. After a meticulous, frame-by-frame analysis, intelligence officers delivered their verdict. The official score for 2nd Lieutenant Robert Foy was not 14. It was 5 aircraft destroyed, 1 probably destroyed, and 3 damaged. Still, one of the most successful strafing runs by a single pilot in the 357th's decorated history. So, if the legend was an exaggeration, does that diminish the achievement? In fact, the truth reveals something far more important about how the air war was actually being won. Robert Foy's real achievement wasn't a legendary number. It was a brutal, textbook execution of how the air war was now being won. The romantic image of duels in the sky was over. Victory now came from the ground up, by systematically annihilating the enemy's ability to even get airborne. The P-51 Mustang was the perfect weapon for this. Its extreme range reached Prague, its diving speed ensured surprise, and its firepower guaranteed destruction. Foy's attack was a microcosm of this cold, industrial strategy that broke the Luftwaffe. The legend remembers the pilot who claimed 14 planes. History should remember the mission that proved a fighter on the ground is just a target.